The FBI has caught Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin. 22-year-old Tyler Robinson's family turned him in and authorities apprehended him in Zion National Park just a few hours later. But the government reaction to the podcaster's public murder is only getting stranger by the minute, with calls to quell a nationwide rise in political violence, while at the same time promoting violent rhetoric against their political adversaries. Take, for instance, this incredibly weird closing remark from FBI Director Kash Patel.
Rest now, brother. We have the watch. And I'll see you in Valhalla.
Valhalla, I'll remind you, is the warrior's paradise. In this video, I'm going to talk about what we know about the alleged shooter, the messages he wrote on his bullets, and how all of this foreshadows a terrible era of violence, and yes, tyranny, across America.
Get ready. They're terrorists. They mean business. So the Justice Department's got to move hyperspeed to arrest the leadership. Because this is a war. This is a war. This is a war. This is the war.
Let's start with the facts. According to Utah Governor Spencer Cox, Tyler Robinson was apprehended after his father, a retired sheriff and registered Republican, turned him in. Robinson's roommate showed law enforcement a series of messages on Discord, which is an application often used in conjunction with online gaming, that mentioned where he left his rifle, his getaway plans, as well as descriptions of engravings he left on the bullets. So let's go over that first. The bullet he actually fired said, "Notices bulges, OWO, what is this?" which is a slang term in gaming which basically announces victory over an opponent. The next bullet said, "Hey fascist, catch," which seems pretty self-explanatory. Then there were controller commands for launching bombs in a different online game, and then the saying, "Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao," which are lyrics from an anti-fascist song from World War II. The last bullet said, "Hey, if you read this, you are gay," which is pretty typical homophobic banter that seems to fit in with the gaming motif that he wrote on the other bullets, but in this case probably directed to law enforcement. Various photos of Robinson have circulated online showing him wearing a zombie Trump costume for Halloween, posing with a machine gun, and looking like a fairly typical white teenager from a conservative household in Utah. His father told the FBI that Robinson had expressed a distaste for Kirk just a few days earlier in a discussion with the family. Finally, it seems clear that he fits the body type of the security footage that the FBI released during the manhunt. And if all of this evidence is accurate, it would seem that the FBI has a pretty open and shut case that they got the right guy, and Robinson is in fact the shooter. Yesterday, I released a video that posited both the lone gunman theory and the possibility that this was a false flag operation to bolster Trump's presidency. Now, unless the evidence changes radically in the next few days or weeks, it seems that Robinson did in fact act alone, and this was not affiliated with any government agency. But that doesn't mean that the Trump administration isn't already using the assassination to justify cracking down on his political opponents and sending National Guard troops into liberal cities and to further concentrate power into the executive branch. In other words, just like with the assassination attempt on his life last summer, he will take this opportunity to justify any political action against his perceived enemies.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today.
Other than revealing the facts of the case as they stand now, Governor Cox gave an impassioned speech about how important it is to stop the growing trend of political violence across the nation.
Words are not violence. Violence is violence. We can return violence with violence. We can return hate with hate. And that's the problem with political violence, is it metastasizes, because we can always point the finger at the other side. At some point, we have to find an off-ramp, or it's going to get much, much worse.
These same sentiments were echoed by Democrat and Republican leaders across America, from Bernie Sanders.
Every American, no matter what one's political point of view may be, must condemn all forms of political violence and all forms of intimidation.
To Kamala Harris. And to this, I have to say that I have mixed feelings. Because Kirk was on a debate tour across America, literally using the power of his words to convince people of his own political positions. As someone on YouTube, I support that mission. But according to Governor Cox, Kirk was a saint who treasured peace above all else.
He again said, when you stop having a human connection with someone you disagree with, it becomes a lot easier to commit violence. He said, what we as a culture have to get back to is being able to have reasonable agreement where violence is not an option.
And this, well, it just astounds me, because Kirk was absolutely a proponent of violent resistance. Indeed, that was the main focal point of his pro-gun speaking tour across America. He wasn't just a proponent of gun ownership. He was a proponent of using guns to defend political beliefs. He has dozens of videos on YouTube expressing those very sentiments. Here's a clip from a video titled, "The Best Gun Debate I've Had in Years."
A well-armed citizenry is the greatest protectorate of liberty and freedom in this country. I ascribe to the government bad motives and bad intentions when it wants to infringe more on these types of freedoms and liberties.
In another debate, he echoed the NRA argument that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Why do we protect our banks, our airports, and our sports stadiums with people with guns, but not our schools?
Kirk believed that guns are the best way to protect yourself from gun violence. Now, while this did not prove to be the case in his own death, he mainly also articulated a constitutional belief that violence, or at least the threat of violence, by citizens was the most important bulwark against government tyranny. And herein lies the essential problem at the very root of American democracy. How can political violence both be an essential facet of freedom at the same time that it also has no place in democracy? How can the president order an extrajudicial killing of a boatload of people merely suspected of drug trafficking? How can he imprison millions of immigrants without due process and also announce that the city of Chicago is to find out why he renamed the Department of Defense the Department of War? How can all of these things happen and we not expect an armed resistance? The first two amendments of the Constitution attempt to balance a very problematic contradiction at the heart of American democracy. The first ensures freedom of religion, freedom of speech and organization, while the second literally begins with the words, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Our very founding document says that citizens need to revolt if their rights are threatened. And don't just take it from me. Take it from Charlie Kirk.
I think within the Second Amendment, it also implies that we have high regulations in the first four words.
Sort of. Well-regulated militia actually meant well-armed, but that's a separate issue. But
well, how do you know? You're interpreting what the Founding Fathers
Well,
put
they
in.
said it in the Federalist Papers, right? So it's not just me, but also in the Heller decision, in the 5-4 decision, that said that gun ownership was a right. This was a hotly debated thing. And my worldview comes out of one in the 20th century, where almost every totalitarian government went after the guns first. And the confiscation of guns then leads into the erosion of freedom and liberty.
According to Kirk, the right to own guns means that sometimes you also have the right to use them. The Constitution accepts that words are not sufficient to protect personal liberty against a tyrannical government. But the Trump administration, Democratic leaders, and basically the entire internet is trying to wrap themselves into all sorts of knots, saying that the time for violence can never be now. For now, we must always follow the law. But here's the thing. Tyrannical governments always act within the bounds of their own laws. They change the laws to suit their actions. The Holocaust was legal under German law. The American Revolution was an illegal insurrection against a completely legal and tyrannical government. Trump has concentrated more power into his hands than any president before him. He is essentially a king. Now, if you want a nuanced discussion for how we arrived here, see this conversation I did with David Sirota about the unitary executive theory promoted by the Federalist Society and the basis for Project 2025. But the reality right now is that Trump controls the courts. He controls the monetary policy. He is ruling by fiat. He has sent armed troops into liberal cities and is creating massive detention centers across the nation. This is the very sort of government that the Constitution was meant to protect us from. So it's not at all surprising that there are some people out there who see violence as the only way out. Meanwhile, Trump blames the radical left and ignores any of the reasons for why people might want to take matters into their own hands.
Radical left political violence has hurt too many innocent people and taken too many lives.
The sad truth is that the violence that is being unleashed right now on the right and on the left, well, it's of the right's own making. Well, it may be a tragedy that Charlie Kirk was murdered during a debate. We cannot and should not think that he was an innocent proponent of peace above all else. As for Tyler Robinson, it appears that he was just a lone gamer kid who was radicalized by online discourse. He liked guns and thought he could change the world by using one. My guess is that he will have succeeded only in giving the Trump administration more reason to commit violence against his political opponents. Eventually, though, as more people realize that they have no power to influence the direction of the government, that their votes are not being counted fairly, and their neighbors are being deported, an organized and violent resistance that has been an American tradition all along will almost certainly, and tragically, come into being. From PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.